This is Mundo Revolução, and we're going to talk about the situation in Israel today, October 23, 2025, at 2 p.m. here in Rio de Janeiro, 8 p.m. in Jerusalem, as I record this video. Well, operations continue here in the Gaza Strip, and there aren't many Israeli operations, right? Israel is consolidating its occupation of 58% of the Gaza Strip, as it only needs to move on to the next point after all the hostages' bodies are released. For now, there are still 13 hostages' bodies to be returned to Israel, one of which was handed over today, but they don't know which hostage. So, it's still going to be verified, and forensic analysis will be conducted to identify this body, right? Actions were taken against terrorists who participated in the October 7th attacks, and terrorists were eliminated here and in the Gaza Strip. Because of this, Israel also carried out an operation here in the Purple Strip region, here between Syria and the Golan Heights. And there were also a lot of operations here in southern Lebanon, right? So much buzz. Well, it gave a lot to talk about, from a diplomatic standpoint. There was a vote in the Knesset, right, in the House of Representatives, right, from Israel, approving a plan to occupy Jordan or Judea and Samaria, right? The United States didn't like it, the Arab countries didn't like it, but let's be honest, I don't think that's going to happen. Let's see what happens here, right? We'll talk about these and other topics in detail. This news was suggested by In Search of the Snooker Champion Postman, Kerkaldo, The Implacable, and several others. Thanks to the people who suggested news on our website, wrevolving.com. And thanks to you who are watching our video. If you like our content, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Well, if you look at the Gaza Strip, things are pretty peaceful, very little has happened. You can see that Israel is occupying the agreed upon area of the yellow line, right? Except for this area here that Israel is still occupying. It has the right to occupy up to the yellow line, right? So that's what's happening here, right? Here, look, you see, Israel is preparing to occupy this very area here until all the hostages are returned, all the hostages' bodies, right? The remaining 20 hostages have already been returned. Originally, there were 28 hostages who died in captivity missing. Of those, 15 were handed over. Therefore, there are still 13 hostages left for the Israeli army to return to Israel. And in theory, once all these bodies are returned, then the transition process to the new administration in the Gaza Strip begins. And only after the new administration of the Gaza Strip is implemented, Israel will retreat a bit further, right? Yes, precisely in this next activity, right? Remembering that in the original plan, Israel will never liberate the entire Gaza Strip. It will maintain a 2 km corridor along the entire border, including the Philadelphia corridor, which will continue to be used by Israel and will continue to be patrolled by Israel to prevent attacks, right? So, here it is. Israel dividing Gaza into two zones is fascinating from a strategic point of view. The section under Israeli control will likely develop rapidly with international support. The area controlled by Rameh will have trouble continuing to build, obtain materials, access construction materials, and rebuild. At some point, the Gazans will have to decide whether to build a normal life on the Israeli side, on the peaceful side, or remain under Hamas's protection with nothing, right? And expect many protests in this situation, right? No, why are they saying this, right? Of course, this would just be an intermediate step in the peace process, one of those points in Trump's plan. But remember, for Israel to retreat further here, all the hostages must first be returned, and second, Rameh must hand over leadership of the Gaza Strip to another group, right, the transition group. And neither of these things seems to be happening, right? The hostages are being handed over very slowly, drop by drop. Yes, but Rameh has already said he won't relinquish leadership of the Gaza Strip. So, Israel will keep this 58% of the gas here. Yes, including the entire city of Rafah, practically the entire city of Canyons, and a lot of stuff here in the meantime, right? Jared Nair here, who's in Israel, said there will be no funds for reconstruction in areas controlled by Rameh. Because remember, reconstruction funds were promised by the United States, they were promised by Europe for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. But after Rameh leaves, hands over power, and hands over his weapons, if Ramey doesn't hand over his weapons, the areas he continues to control won't receive this aid, right? And this will certainly create a very strong incentive there, because the area in yellow here, the area controlled by Israel, will end up seeing much greater development in Rafah, right? Canyons, all of these areas here, while Gaza City itself, which remains on Ramey's side, will end up in the same mess it is now, right? Well, as I said, there are still 13 hostage bodies left in Gaza, right? They haven't been returned to Israel yet. And today Israeli troops received a coffin, right? It's over there at the Red Cross, near the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Well, and it's still unknown who this person is, who the Israeli hostage who was returned is, right? Ramey himself doesn't know. He's lost control of who it is. So, this body is being taken to a BUFER, the Forensic Institute, their Forensic Medical Institute there. It will be identified to see if it matches one of these hostages. If so, there would be 12 hostages still to be returned to Israel, right? Well, there was an Israeli operation against terrorists who participated in the October 7th attack. This happened just now, and several terrorists were eliminated. Here's the image of the 8 terrorists who were eliminated. Here's the description of the full message here. The terrorists from Ramey, responsible for the kidnapping and hostage-taking, right? Noah Agamani, Vinitan Or, Eaton Moore, and the Nova Festival, and others who participated in the October 7th attack, were eliminated in recent attacks in the Gaza Strip by the Israeli army and Shin Bet, which the Israeli police announced, right? After an intelligence review, the army and Shin Bet say they were able to confirm the deaths of 8 Palestinian terrorists who invaded Israel on October 7th and were involved in this hostage-taking, right? Here's the list of the terrorists who were eliminated. Hey, and here's the image, and here's the list of the 8 who were eliminated. And here's the image of one of these attacks here, or actually, there's more than one attack here. There are several attacks here that have been carried out in recent days against these terrorists, right? Targeted attacks there in the Gaza Strip, right? So, in other words, Israeli operations there continue, right? Well, Ramey sent the message that he won't leave Gaza, no. They're protecting, quote-unquote, Gaza City and said they won't leave there, right? Let's see what will result from that. Hey, it was kind of predictable that this kind of thing would happen. Now Trump said he'll crush Hamas if they continue, if they refuse to disarm, right? And remember, there are no more hostages in the Gaza Strip now. So, an Israeli action now would certainly be much more damaging to Hamas. I think it would be good for Hamas to reconsider, right? Let's see what happens with this story. Well, Israel also managed to seize a number of weapons that were being smuggled near Mount Hermon. There in that region of the Purple Strip, right, between Syria and the Golan Heights. And it also carried out several attacks there in southern Lebanon or even in northern Lebanon, right? You can see here was the point where they seized the weapons, right? And here, look, they actually carried out an attack here in northern Lebanon, in the Baalbek Valley, and it was precisely against the terrorist forces of Hezbollah, right? The Israeli army confirmed that it carried out attacks in Bekaa, right, in the Bekaa Valley, not long ago, saying they targeted a Hezbollah training camp, where terrorists were meeting and manufacturing precision missiles, among other incidents, right? So, here's the image of the attack in northern Lebanon. The Institute for the Study of War says here that Iran continues to try to get back to receiving money from abroad, to reintegrate into the financial regime abroad. So, implementing measures to combat terrorist financing. The big problem with this story is that the Iranian state is a financier of terrorism. So, there's not much of a way, right? What are they trying to say here? That is, look, no, it's not the Iranian state that's financing Hezbollah and Hamas. It's people in Iran who finance these terrorist activities. So we're protecting here. We're going to implement measures to prevent these people from financing Hezbollah, Hamas, and so on, but everyone knows it's the Iranian state itself that does this, right? Well, Marco Rubio arrived in Israel a little while ago and will hold a series of meetings there with Israeli leaders, specifically about the peace plan for the region. And he succeeded. Israel achieved a victory. The United States agreed that Turkish troops will not remain in the Gaza Strip. The peacekeeping forces that will occupy the Gaza Strip after all the dead Israeli hostages are returned will consist primarily of soldiers from Azerbaijan and Indonesia, which are also Muslim countries that respect Muslims and all that, but are very distant countries. Azerbaijan is even a friend of Israel, Indonesia is also a friend of Israel. So, maybe that's a real way to resolve this, but again, it all depends on Ramos leaving power, or Ramos giving up power. Will that happen? We'll see. In any case, it's good to have Turkey involved, because Turkey and Israel are already fighting over there in Syria. Having another front between Turkey and Israel in the Gaza Strip wouldn't be very good. Well, yesterday the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, passed a law, or passed the first phase of voting on a law that would allow the annexation of large parts of Jordan, right, Judea and Samaria, to Israeli territory. Basically, we talked about this a while ago. There would be 7 large areas, and 7 pieces of land that would still be under Palestinian control, Ramallah and so on. Some areas, some specific cities, would still be under control, but the rest of the area would be under Israeli control, right? And Israeli sovereignty, that is, Israel could build cities, settlements, whatever, right? Nowadays, the truth is that much of this area is already controlled by Israel, right? But theoretically, sovereignty belongs to the Palestinians, it belongs to the Palestinian Authority, right? So President Vance says he didn't like this, that at this delicate moment, it's not the time for that. Well, maybe that's the fact. Wait a little longer and then do it later, because I think it should. Well, the United States itself spoke here. Trump spoke about Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I promised the Arab countries that this wouldn't happen. If Israel continues with this, it will lose American support. In other words, it kind of, put a stop to it, right? But anyway, as people are saying here, this first vote is just to see if Israel will consider the law. It still has to go through a bunch of committees and in the end it has to be approved by the Knesset, right? So, this law is a long way from being approved. Most likely, it won't go anywhere, right? Well, if you consider that in Brazil, the same thing happens. A bunch of proposed laws start in the chambers, in the various committees, and never leave, never do anything, eventually being closed, right? So this shouldn't be a big deal. Thanks for watching the video until the end. If you like the content, don't forget to like it. This helps the channel grow and reach more people. If you didn't like it, leave a dislike and explain how we can improve in the comments. Also, leave suggestions for topics we can bring here. Insulting comments or those defending dictatorship and war criminals will be immediately blocked. Thank you for your understanding. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button below and ticking the bell for all notifications. If you'd like to help the channel, see how you can do so on our website.